This is Krista Michener. Welcome back to Made to Be Whole. Today we're going to be going over a case study regarding inflammation, figuring out the root causes, and how to calm the storm. Stay tuned. Made to Be Whole is intended for informational purposes only. It's not intended to replace the advice or care of a licensed healthcare professional. Participating in this podcast does not constitute a provider-patient relationship with Krista Michener, AHP Integrative Health, or any of the guests featured on Made to Be Whole. Krista Michener, AHP Integrative Health, and any featured guests aren't responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from use of information obtained in this podcast or associated materials. Please consult a healthcare professional for any health-related concerns that you are experiencing. Welcome back. So today, with permission, we're going to do a case study involving inflammation and my husband. I don't have written consent, but he told me it was okay. So I mentioned in a previous episode how around Thanksgiving he started to have chest pain. That was kind of mysterious. He had a normal EKG. We did an x-ray, one lobe of his lung was collapsed. We did some follow-up CAT scans to figure out the cause of that, and it appeared to be what's called idiopathic. What idiopathic means to me is that we're idiots, and we haven't figured it out. Technically, it means that there's no known cause. I actually had a patient this week tell me that she had a provider who kept telling her, no, this is idiopathic, like this was a diagnosis for something she was dealing with, and she just needed to accept that she shouldn't be looking for other reasons because it was idiopathic. But everything in health and medicine and our body has a cause. It's just if we have the tools available yet to discover them, or if we've dug deep enough to look. Some things probably don't merit a deep dive. We may have back pain that lasts a day and we don't know what happens, but then it goes away and doesn't come back. Well, that's idiopathic perhaps, but it's not really worth your time and energy. But if it's something persistent, or it's something that involves your heart or your chest, that's alarming and that's worth a deeper dive. So even though we weren't able to find anything via imaging, based on symptoms, I said, I think this is probably some sort of pericarditis, which was inflammation around the sac that the heart is in, the pericardium. And so we treated it that way. I did some short-term anti-inflammatory things, did a burst of steroids, trying to put the fire out. But another thing we did, and this is something that is part of our pain management package, is IV procaine. So let me tell you what his labs looked like before and after IV procaine, and why this can be really effective for systemic inflammation. So when I did his initial laboratory work, cardiac enzymes were normal. We did find a low iron level, which we're addressing, but he had an elevated C-reactive protein and an elevated high sensitivity C-reactive protein. So C-reactive protein is basically a marker of inflammation. It tells you that yes, there's inflammation here in higher levels than normal. Depending on the level of elevation, you have to, well, I guess I'll backtrack and say the level of elevation tells you what you need to do. So somebody who has extremely high levels of C-reactive protein, you start looking for things like cancer. But when you have moderately elevated levels, usually you're looking more at infection or something along those lines. So his initial C-reactive protein was 13.8. The reference range, meaning what's considered normal, from this lab is 0 to 3. So you can see that's more than 4 times the upper limit of normal. Sometimes we'll look at the severity of something by how much higher it is than the top of the normal range. So 3 is the top of the normal range, or the upper limit of normal, and his was 13.8. So that was significant. But then, because he was having pain in the chest, I did this high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which looks at risk for cardiovascular disease, and it's more looking at inflammation in the heart. So the normal level in the lab we used was also 0 to 3 for the high sensitivity C-reactive protein, and his was 9.37. So 3 times, more than 3 times the upper limit of normal. If you look at the breakdown of the relative risk for a future cardiovascular event based on that lab, so meaning when they looked statistically at the levels of this high sensitivity, high C-reactive protein, how likely was it that that person would go on to have a future cardiovascular event, which could be a heart attack or other things. So you're considered low risk if you're less than 1, average risk if you're between 1 and 3, and high risk if you're over 3. So that did not bode well. I'm not really interested in my husband having a heart attack or any such thing. So in addition to doing oral anti-inflammatories, we did IV procaine. And so procaine, again, it is what was used in Novocaine for your dental work back in the day. And so we do infusions that have saline, sodium bicarbonate, because that makes things alkaline. Instead of having an acidic environment in your body, the sodium bicarbonate turns it the other way. And then we work up with procaine to a more modest dose. We always start out slow because we want to make sure somebody is not having difficulty tolerating it, that sort of thing. So we did 6 IV procaine sessions for Eric, and then we rechecked his labs. And this is about 5 weeks after the original labs. His C-reactive protein, we'll pull it up here, dropped to less than 2.9. So they stopped measuring at that point. They just said you're in a normal range. So we go from over 13 to 2.9. And even better, in my opinion, is that his high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which is over 9, went all the way down to 1.76. So that's fantastic for a lot of different reasons. First of all, it shows that we really were reducing inflammation, and his resolution of symptoms was more gradual. Things began to slowly get better. It wasn't like we started things and immediately all was well. He still didn't feel well for several weeks, but the pain started getting less frequent and less intense. Now, that being said, that's a great intervention, but I still was flummoxed as to what caused this elevated level in the first place. And I stumbled across some labs from someone else that they had brought, and they had elevated levels of Coxsackie virus B3. So, Coxsackie virus comes in groups A and B. Group A is typically what causes hand, foot, and mouth disease that you see in kids and is contagious. It's a virus. Usually it's something that takes care of itself. But I was digging into, well, what is this Coxsackie virus B3, because I wasn't familiar with that. And it turns out that it is a subgroup of this virus family that can cause myocarditis and pericarditis. Myocarditis being inflammation of the muscle of the heart, pericarditis being that heart sac, and also pleurodynia, which is this pain on breathing. I thought, well, let's dig a little deeper here. What can we find out? Is there any chance that Eric could have had this virus? So we'll pull up here his results. I did the whole panel for the Coxsackie B viruses, and I'll read you the results. I don't know that you'll find them as riveting as I did, but I was just absolutely fascinated. So there are 6 subgroups: Coxsackie B1, B2, B3, B4, B5, B6. Negative for all of these groups is less than 1 to 100 ratio. So for B1, all of these, remember, less than 1 to 100 is what we go in for. They were all 6 positive. We had 1 to 500, 1 to 500, 1 to 100, 1 to 100, 1 to 1,000, and 1 to 500. So even though I obviously have not exhausted every possible source of inflammation, this sure lines up. Here we have a group of viruses that can cause inflammation in multiple different organs, including the heart, and Eric's got these elevated levels. What I found fascinating too, digging into this, some of these Coxsackie viruses put people at risk for sudden onset type 1 diabetes, because if it attacks the pancreas, that's the manifestation that you can have. And I found it like really interesting and disgusting at the same time that we saw, as far as educational information that's available for patients, and even in some of the medical literature, the same sort of garbage that we see in the case of a lot of infections or conditions. They say, oh, well, these infections can cause sudden onset infection in your brain. It can cause meningitis, even your heart, your pancreas, and you can die. But usually it's self-limiting and will go away on its own, so just don't worry about it. Just treat the symptoms. I don't find that very satisfying. So what we can do, even though we don't have specific like antiviral therapies that are approved that are targeted for this Coxsackie B virus, we know there's a lot of overlap in viruses, viral replication, what they need to thrive in the body. And so what I do is I tend to turn toward, well, what do we know about other viruses? What do we know about what can effectively treat those and do it safely? Now, there are some providers who will use, and I've used it in some situations too, for like elevated Epstein-Barr virus or others, they'll use valcyclovir or Valtrex, which was most commonly used for herpes virus, or sometimes for shingles we'll use it too. So Valtrex is something that's available commercially that's got some broader antiviral properties. What I did for Eric is there's a really great supplement called Humavir, so that's Humavir, and you can read more about it at the website Humeo, Humeo.io. This is Dr. David Sokol's product. I met him at a conference last year and was really impressed with the scientific rigor of what he's done with the production standards, all of those things. So it's got great antiviral properties. It's been shown to clear like late stage Epstein-Barr. It's had great benefits for COVID. It's derived from humic acid, which is plant-derived, and it supports immune system, decreases inflammation, reduces oxidative stress. They use raw materials that have been in locations that have been studied by geologists for 20 years, and then they've done a lot of ongoing study to make this more pure, more potent, quality controlled. So what we're doing for Eric, the inflammation's down, but these numbers came back later, and so we're starting him on Humavir. I'm going to do it twice a day for a month and recheck then the viral titers, and then also add in some other like immune supporting products. So a couple that I love, you know, I'm a big fan of Orthomolecular, and their products will be available from us online in the next month or so, because we are getting that wholesale private label contract with them, which I'm excited about. So a couple of products that are really fantastic for their antiviral benefits. One is Wholemune, so WHOLEMUNE, and what is that is it's primarily baker's yeast extract, which has got really good immune stimulating properties. They also make, and I mentioned it in another podcast, we were talking about just viral, beating the bugs in the winter sort of thing, Virusid, which is a good nutrient balance for disrupting viral replication and supporting your immune system. So there are a lot of different things you can do because we're out of that crisis stage and the inflammation's calmed down and he's not having symptoms. I'm not in panic mode, but I did start him on Humavir this week when we got the results, and then I'm going to add the whole Mune in a week. I really like, unless you're in a crisis situation, adding one thing at a time so that you've got better data about what's affecting you, and also just common sense. If you start 3 or 4 different things at once, if one of them makes you sick or you have an allergic reaction, you don't know which one it is and you're stuck. So that approach most of the time of starting things and separating them by at least a few days. I think 3 days is a minimum for most things, then you're in good shape. If it's something you've already been on before, then it's fine to restart it with other new things at the same time. So along those lines, I wanted to talk about other products that have good anti-inflammatory benefits, because inflammation is responsible for so many different things. Inflammation obviously can cause pain, and the degree of pain depends on how tight the space is. So what I mean is, if you have inflammation in your arm, you have an infection there, it's probably going to hurt, but it's not going to be too bad unless somebody bumps it or you put on tight clothing or something where it's causing pressure. But if you've got inflammation in tight spaces, it's going to be more distressing. So one place that inflammation can be very distressing is the brain, because you've got really tight spaces. You've got the brain, you've got fluid around it, you've got your skull, everything's pretty tightly packed. So a small amount of inflammation can cause a large amount of distress. And brain inflammation, it can look like a headache, but it can also look like psychiatric symptoms. So whenever anybody has sudden onset anxiety who has not had a new traumatic event, doesn't have any history, there's nothing going on to make them anxious, but they go, oh my gosh, I just was suddenly so anxious and I can't figure out what's going on, and I'm trying to take things for anxiety and they're not working. In my mind, I'm going, that's not a serotonin issue. That's got something to do with inflammation. Something triggered that. So looking at causes, obviously, like your heart, the sac around your heart, there's not a lot of loose space there. Another type of inflammation that causes a lot of symptoms that I don't think is really talked about is vascular inflammation. So that's just referring to the blood vessels in your body. So if you think about it, you've got this system of pipes of varying different sizes, and if you get inflammation inside the pipes, then you're going to have a harder time getting blood to go through easily. You're going to have more pressure, heaviness, pain, numbness, that sort of thing. I think it's important when you have numbness in your hands or your legs or feet to work out, is this neurological? Everybody thinks, oh, if I have numbness, I have neuropathy, I have some sort of nerve problem, and it's possible, but there are other things that can cause it. Now, if you have numbness on one side of your body, very, very high likelihood that that's more neurological. But if you've got numbness in both hands, both legs, you have to look at the vascular component. If you've got inflammation in those blood vessels, and then anything that makes it harder for blood to get through there, you've got pressure, you've got swelling, you've got pain. Sometimes in the legs that can lead to edema, which is that swelling in the tissues. Sometimes it just leads to heaviness. I know when I was in the middle of Bartonella treatment and I started hitting it harder, I would wake up in the middle of the night and my hands and forearms would be numb. And I believe what that was die-off, because we know that Bartonella lives in your blood vessels. It's a vascular infection. And so if I'm causing increased inflammation because I'm treating an infection, we've talked about that in some previous episodes. So you start treating an infection, the immune system sends in the troops, there's more activity, there's more inflammation, swelling, you feel worse before you feel better. Well, because I was aggressively hitting Bartonella, I believe what I was feeling in my hands wasn't neurological. It was that there was this vascular inflammation, and then sleeping with my little hands up or crank things that I normally do that don't cause them to be numb did during that period of treatment, but then it resolved. But it's really uncomfortable. when I hear people talk about heaviness in their legs, I think vascular inflammation. So, things you can do to help inflammation in general, but blood vessels specifically. General inflammation, which can have positive benefits here. I do really like turmeric or curcumin. There's a lot of different brands out there. You just want, with everything you choose, like we've talked about before, to make sure it's a good company that has good quality control. You can take 500. Some people will say up to 3 times a day. It really depends on the potency of the supplement. I know with Turiva, which is turmeric from Orthomolecular, they have published research that showed benefits at 1 capsule a day. Some people will take 2, depending on if they're a really pro-inflamed state. But for a lot of people, the 1 a day will be effective. There are combination supplements that include that. One that I really like that's great for inflammation is called Cytoquel, Cytoquel. It's from Research Nutritionals, who I also really like, and this is available on our store webpage through the Research Nutritionals link. So it has been shown to show not just significant reduction, but pretty rapid reduction in physical discomfort, which can obviously cause improved sleep. Some of the ingredients it has in it, there are a lot of like combination anti-inflammatory things. So they've got turmeric, they have N-acetylcysteine, ECGC, EGCG. I always flip my letters. EGCG, which is black tea extract. Resveratrol. Resveratrol has great anti-inflammatory properties. It's that grape seed extract or grape extract. So that sort of combination product can be sometimes really helpful. And this is a once a day product. I do have one patient I'm thinking of who we started on this because of chronic headaches, and it really did sound inflammatory to me because of the anxiety that was associated with it, and this has really helped turn a corner. So it can be used on a more regular basis, or it can be used as needed, but it works pretty quickly. If you're somebody who's kind of hypersensitive to things, you're probably better off if you start with products that are single ingredient rather than the combo products. So you might want to first take turmeric or take resveratrol or EGCG and see how you respond to those before you dive into something that's a little more wackadoodle. Interestingly, with my husband Eric, and my son Daniel, we've both done that amazing genetic testing that I have talked so much about through Intelix DNA. And it showed genetically that they were both prone to inflammation. And there are a lot of different inflammatory pathways that get looked at through the testing, but specifically it had stood out to me that they are more likely to have higher levels of C-reactive protein. So we know that this anti-inflammatory approach that we're doing, we used the big guns to get down that, especially that high sensitivity C-reactive protein, but we've got to do more maintenance in this case, especially when the heart's involved, because we want to reduce risk. I know that there are people who are hesitant to use supplements or multiple supplements, but my approach is if it's targeted and it can prevent disease, I would much rather be giving him a handful of targeted supplements than having a heart attack and a handful of medication to try to prevent another heart attack. We're just much, much better off to go ahead and be preventative. And interestingly, too, with Eric, when I'm going over his genetic report, he does have other SNPs or single nucleotide polymorphisms, or these genetic variants that put him at risk for inflammation and specifically cardiac inflammation. So he is at the age and after this episode, it was a real wake-up call to me that, this could be not too far around the corner if we don't act now. And I think that his health is worth like every penny. I want him around for a long time, and I want him functioning well so he can take care of me. Because he's my everything. Other things that can help as far as vascular inflammation goes, sometimes what we need to really look at is enzymes that improve blood flow and are preventing a buildup of things in those blood vessels. So nattokinase is a pretty safe bet for most people. Nattokinase enzymes, it's not your biggest guns out there, but if you're looking for a preventative approach, it's a pretty good one. Timed release niacin, which is B3, is another one. But again, with all of these things, you can try some general anti-inflammatory approaches, but I think for the most part, you're much better off if you can save for some of these fantastic tests to take the guesswork out of it. Because even though DNA testing or micronutrient testing is an upfront investment, you can save money over time by not guessing and spending all of this money on interventions that seem cheaper, but if you add them up and add the time lost while you're doing all of this guesswork, you're not really saving money. You're not really saving money. I think it's a fantastic investment. I want to give a shout out again to, if you're not aware of it, to Care Credit. So if there's something like this that you want to do but have hesitancy about cost, which is, absolutely reasonable, most of us aren't rolling in excess cash, Care Credit, and it's just carecredit.com, is a really fantastic option for people. It's a healthcare credit card. So you can use it at any provider, lab, whatever, who accepts Care Credit, and we do accept it at our office. But what's nice about it is you can use it for major healthcare purchases, but depending on how big the purchase is, it can be 6 months or more, same as cash. So it's interest free for a period of time for major purchases. So something like the genetic test would be something that it would be worth doing, and all you have to do is go to carecredit.com. I first became familiar with them when our little dog was attacked like 10 years ago and had the gazillion-dollar surgery to save him that I didn't have the cash for. We got Care Credit, but then looking into it more, what it can do for our patients, it's a really great option. And by us shifting payment to them, just giving you a little more education too about financing, like why don't I accept payments for labs? Why do I expect payment up front? We're a small business. We're trying to run a tight ship and to be able to keep our prices lower. When you get into financing things for people, then you're spending a lot more in overhead, paying people to do billing, to do collections. You're obviously going to have things that are delinquent. It drives up our patients' prices. So I would much rather keep my patients' prices where they are and tap into resources like Care Credit to open doors for people to get tests that will help them out. For specialty labs, most of the labs don't accept Care Credit, but if your provider does, like we do, we can process the payment for you, and you can still get it covered that way. So just a shout out to another company that I feel like is making a difference and making quality, personalized healthcare more accessible for our patients. So thank you to Eric for allowing me to share all of his private information, and I'm grateful for just the resources that are available. I did not set out on this career path. I really feel like it's something that God put before me, and I did not see myself as qualified, but I've been so blessed to be able to find things to help my family, and then to take those and to be able to share with you and help my patients and empower us all so that we can be healthcare consumers and not just victims, and so that you can have more knowledge and more power to guide your own recovery and even better prevention to keep you out of the ER and away from those heart attacks and strokes and Alzheimer's and other diseases, that there's a lot more that we can do than our conventional medical world acknowledges. So remember to never give up and to have hope, because you were made to be whole. Have a podcast question or suggestion? Text or call us on the podcast info line at 330-439-0686. Thank you for spending time with me today. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to be notified when new episodes release. And remember, you were made to be whole.